I've been a big Beatles fan my entire life. Well, actually, that's not quite right. I'm not that big. I'm 5'10 and 170 pounds, and I didn't discover the Beatles until I was about 10 years old. The first record album I ever bought was Abbey Road in 1972. I didn't realize at the time that the Beatles had broken up 2 years earlier. And what attracted me to the Beatles was not just their music. It was four guys that formed a band. They wrote great songs, and they really seemed to love one another. With movies like A Hard Day's Night, Help, and Yellow Submarine, the attraction only grew. Gradually, I worked my way through their discography backwards. I bought more Beatles albums over time until I bought Meet the Beatles from I think 1964. And once I discovered the history of the Beatles, I had tremendous respect for where they had come from as a gigging band to a recording band, because I missed all of Beatlemania.
I was late in discovering the genius behind Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, but that much admired album included a lot of orchestra and tape effects that were previously unheard in popular music. Years later, a friend bought me the book Beatles Gear, and I came to learn more about the Mellotron and the reverse tapes techniques that were used on songs like Mr. Kite and A Day in the Life. It's hard to imagine today, but at the time, the only way to learn the studio techniques used by the Beatles and George Martin was to buy a book. The Mellotron was invented in 1963, and it used magnetic tape loops that would play back with the push of a key. It's the sound on Strawberry Fields Forever that we all recognize.
The Mellotron uses the same concept as a sampler, but generates its sound using analog samples recorded on audio tape rather than digital samples. When a key is pressed, a tape connected to it is pushed against a playback head, as in a tape deck. While the key remains depressed, the tape is drawn over the head, and a sound is played. When the key is released, a spring pulls the tape back to its original position.
Interesting factoid. Comedic actor Peter Sellers owned a Mellotron. No doubt, the Mellotron was an influential early analog sampler, which evolved into the digital samplers we use today. But in addition to it being an interesting convenience, the very notion of using pre-recorded sounds and playing them back on a keyboard set the tone for many years to come. As a young person, I played piano, and I didn't know much about electronic keyboards or sampling at the time. All I wanted was an electronic keyboard, and I begged my parents to buy me one, but it was beyond our budget. Fortunately, a close high school friend bought a used Fender Rhodes 73 and let me play it often. It's hard to describe the excitement of playing a Rhodes piano. I don't think most people realize how expressive that instrument can be. You can play it soft and melodic with bells, or you can play it hard and rockin' with distortion and aggression. It's a simple setup with metal bars and pickups, but it can provide a wide variety of sounds for different types of music. I spent hours playing the Rhodes, learning everything from rock to funk to ballads. So, for a while, there was experimental music moving in the direction of samples, while traditional instruments and popular keyboards like the Fender Rhodes, Horner clavinet, and Hammond B3 became staples in popular music. There was no intersection between these two camps until synthesizers became more popular in the 1970s. Early synthesizers attempted to mimic acoustic sounds through analog oscillators, filters, and effects. A lot of effort went into tweaking analog synthesizers. Meanwhile, the idea of sampling acoustic instruments and playing them back was on the back burner until the mid-1980s. Computer technology helped advance samplers for music, but they were expensive, and only the most successful artists had the time and money to use them. By the 90s, digital samplers were more affordable to keyboard players and average musicians, and were being used in all genres of music, but particularly in electronic music. Did the Beatles start this whole trend with the Mellotron? Other bands used the Mellotron in the 60s, like the Moody Blues and the Beach Boys, at the same time as the Beatles. But experimenting with new sounds in creative ways was part of the Beatles' DNA. So I tend to give the Beatles credit for validating sampling as an artistic expression method beyond just mimicking acoustic sounds. Is sampling cheating? There is a stigma attached to sampling that it seems like cheating. And that's because some artists have been very successful by using the hook or bass line of an old song in their music. One example that jumps to mind is MC Hammer in the song Can't Touch This, where the bass line is taken directly from Super Freak by Rick James. Another blatant example is a bass line from Another One Bites the Dust by Queen, which has been used over and over again. Interesting factoid, the most sampled song of all times is Amen Brother by the Winstons from 1969. These are examples where a DJ has played an old record without modification as the inspiration for a dance tune with a new beat. The genre developed honestly enough, but raised all kinds of questions about song copyright protection and if parts of a song are covered by copyright law. How far does this protection go? Can you copyright a 4-chord progression? Who owns the scale of E minor? But the Beatles started something more significant than that. They used samples as a starting point, then made modifications to make the sample their own. Today, this technique is very common, and it's impossible to tell whether a sound source began with a sample, a real acoustic instrument, or a synthesized sound. In fact, it doesn't seem to matter anymore where the sound source came from.
Sampled them from them, but it's not the same bass line. Like it goes ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding ding ding. That's the way theirs goes. Ours goes ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding 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 diggy ding ding.
Is sampling cheating then? It depends on how those samples are used, but I generally don't believe that sampled sounds are cheating or somehow lower value in music compositions. You could argue that we've been sampling all along. When early synthesizers were developed, they targeted the sounds of a Rhodes or Hammond B3. The goal was to replicate acoustic instruments in a more conventional device. The popular synthesizers of the 80s and 90s did exactly the same thing. The ubiquitous and popular Yamaha DX7 had the same 32 preset patches used by multiple artists, and it could be heard in almost all popular songs. Reversing a sound, song, or phrase was made popular by the Beatles. It's part of the build-up in A Day in the Life, and was accomplished by playing the tape of a recorded orchestra backwards. It seemed the reverse technique had repercussions for the Fab Four when fans heard Paul is Dead by playing the song Revolution No. 9 backwards. Still, almost every digital sampler has a built-in feature to flip or reverse audio, so it's used a lot. In a strange reverse twist of fate, it's worth asking the question, how many modern artists have sampled Beatles songs? According to the website whosampled.com, the Beatles have been sampled and featured in other songs more than 1,200 times. The most sampled bits are from the songs Come Together, Eleanor Rigby, and All You Need Is Love. Maybe there's an underlying message in those three songs together. Come Together, Eleanor Rigby, All You Need Is Love. We don't credit the Beatles with inventing sampling from a technical point of view, but they did lay the foundation for sound design that starts with a sampled source. More importantly, their creativity and interest in different sounds opened up the music listening public to new ideas.
If topics like this interest you, please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, and you'll find out when I release new videos.